The dark clouds are like the moonlight in the sleeves, leaving only gaps in the flow, so that the white moonlight shines down, crosses the air, and brings a trace of light to the dim earth. The harsh sound of the engine sounded, causing the trees that were gently swaying in the breeze to twist in one direction, making a rustling sound. The quiet forest suddenly became noisy, and a large area of flying Pokémon was alarmed and flew out of the woods screaming. Huge black shadows cast down, obscuring all remaining light. As the flying giant made a harsh rubbing sound against the ground, the black shadow gradually stopped, and through the dim moonlight, one could vaguely see that it was a huge spaceship. After the spacecraft stopped, the hatch opened, and several figures jumped out from inside, standing around the spacecraft. Fourth. How many times have I told you? Before taking off, you should check the system of the spacecraft. What did you say when you were about to set off? If it weren't for your spacecraft, how could it be out of control? Do you know how much we transported this time? Precious, 1 more minute of delay means more risk. Once they run away, will you bear the responsibility? If you screw up the boss's affairs, we will all be finished. As soon as he jumped off the spaceship, he grew very strong. The person pointed to some of the short people and said, and his anger could be heard from his tone. I. The man called the fourth child lowered his head and groaned, not knowing what to say. From his twinkling eyes, it could be seen that he was very afraid of the person in front of him. You, what are you? I get angry just looking at you. When the burly man saw the fourth child like this, he was even more furious. He raised his hand and slapped him. Boss, forget it. Just as the man's hand was about to fall, another man grabbed his arm. That's right, fourth brother, hurry up and take a look, hurry up and fix it, we still have a chance to make it up. On the other side, a very charming voice sounded, Boss, don't be angry, who happened to this kind of thing? There's no other way, let's get the spaceship ready first. Humph. The man called the eldest snorted coldly, ignored the short man, walked around the spacecraft controller to check, and others surrounded him. We didn't expect that we were so lucky that this operation would encounter the loss of control of their spacecraft, which saved our ammunition. In the woods, light laughter spread in a small area. Remember, our mission is to rescue the victims. Capture the elf, grab the props and weapons they stole, and capture them alive as much as possible. Yes. The surrounding air seemed to suddenly become dignified. Behind the big tree, the hidden blue light flickered, and the little elves were released. Tiger Card, you guys protect the young master. There was a hint of helplessness in the eyes of the person who gave the order. Looking at the figure hidden in the crowd behind him, his eyes showed a look of doting, and he threw a pokeball. Come out, Chandelier Ghost, get ready, 3,2,1 on. With his voice, except for the people he pointed to, everyone else moved, rushed out of the woods, and the little elves around them launched attacks one after another, and quickly attacked the spaceship's position. What's going on? Quickly defend. As he said, he threw a pokeball, rebound the attack with the power of thought. With his words, Hootie's eyes lit up, controlled more than a dozen attacks, and bounced them back, and the others also quickly after reacting, they released their own Pokémon, and they defended and resisted, but after all, there were too few of them. Although the level of the elves was not low, the attacks were too intensive, and some of the attacks reached them. Who is it? Come out, it's not the gentleman's actions to sneak around. The boss, who barely defended himself, stood in front of the spaceship, panting slightly, holding a laser gun in his hand, scanning the woods coldly. Hee, as expected of someone who can be the captain of the Galaxy team, that's a good intention. With the frivolous voice, a man walked out of the forest, followed by dozens of people and Pokémon. You guys are really persevering. You have to obstruct every large-scale operation of ours. What kind of grudge does my Galaxy team have with you? The captain said coldly. Do you have any grievances, you know it yourself, and we'll be fine when the guy in our family gets rid of his anger." The man shrugged, then waved his hand suddenly, "Attack!" Under the command of the other party, he also launched an attack, and his hands were not idle. The laser gun was continuously fired. Although it could not be compared with the powerful attack of the Pokémon, there was no problem in blocking it. The rays of light cut through the sky, heading straight for the other party, and then collided in the air, bursting out bright fireworks. A small pointed tip squeezed out from the space of the spaceship, and then moved continuously, moving outward little by little. After a full 5 minutes, it was squeezed out. Half body, with 2 front claws on the ground, pressing back desperately, and soon, his whole body came out, and his round body looked very cute. Running towards the woods, the round body showed incredible speed. "Hey! Run out one, the 6th, go and catch it." Although they have been suppressed, the Galaxy team's defense is relatively stable. There is a captain guarding it, and it is impossible to defeat it for a while. You know, anyone who can become a captain has the strength of a king. At this time, Lao Lu also found the fleeing round land shark. The laser gun in his hand shot a laser, stopped in front of the round land shark, and said to the Overlord Flower beside him, "Use the rattan whip to bring him back." Ba Wanghua responded with a sound, and 2 vines stretched out from both sides of the body to grab the round land shark. The round land shark opened its mouth and spat out a small fireball, which exploded on the vine whip, the anger of the dragon. But at the same time, it was hit by the laser gun, and it took 2 steps back, and then ran faster. Running very fast, Overlord Flower, Sunshine Flame. Following an order, Overlord Flower's head quickly gathered this circle of light. Although it was at night, the speed of solar energy gathering was not slow at all, and the energy preparation was quickly completed. Made a white energy attack to the round land shark, and at this time the round land shark was also hit by the laser gun a few times, leaving a few scars on the legs, moving much slower, and seeing the beam of light was about to kill him. Engulf. Be careful. To everyone's surprise, a somewhat immature voice sounded, and then a small figure Zhang Yunlu She hugged him and used his back to attack the flames of sunlight. "Don't!" The leader on this side noticed and shouted. Yu reading www.yukansha.com's eyes widened. He wanted to do something, but it was too late, so he could only watch the little master use it. Own body under attack. Wu. Yunlu She raised his head and looked at the person holding it, with some doubts in his eyes. What responded to him was the young man's sunny smiling face and gentle eyes, and then when he saw the young man, he closed his eyes and his body softened, as if he had lost all strength. He raised his head and tried his best to send out a dragon's wrath to hit the sunshine flame, but the power was too low. It was just a glass of water, and then the beam of sunshine flame hit the boy's back. The fact is indeed the case. The young man didn't know anything about what happened next, because the moment the attack came to him, he fainted. OM sounded, and a blue light mask lit up on the boy's body, blocking the attack. Then, a huge beam of light emanated from him, shrouding the Galaxy team inside. Somewhere in the distance, an elf egg seemed to sense something. The light blue pattern on the eggshell lit up, moved, rolled out of the nest, and went all the way down. "My child!" Several elves gathered around the nest and watched the egg's movements. One of them screamed and was about to grab the egg, but was stopped by the other elves. Shaking his head gently, "This is his choice, let him go." Hearing this sentence, the elf seemed to calm down before, watching it fell from the edge of the cliff and then disappeared without stopping anything. The novel Pokémon, AO Feng will be published on the official WeChat platform. There are more fresh content, and there is also a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the upper right to add a friend, search the public account dread and follow, hurry up. PS, if you want to hear more of your voices, and want to receive more of your suggestions, search the WeChat public account dread and follow it now to give more support to Pokemon, AO Feng. PS, if you want to hear more of your voices, and want to receive more of your suggestions, search the WeChat public account dread and follow it now to give more support to Pokemon, AO Feng. Wu Yu Kuang. What do you have to do to stop? A man in a cloak yelled at a man and a woman in front of him. Stop! The man named Wu Yu Kuang twitched the corners of his mouth, with anger flashing in his eyes. I'll stop if I'm happy, let's go. Dharma baboons, shoot flames. He threw out a elf the ball, the fiery red Dharma baboon was released. Following Wu Yu Kuang's order, the Dharma baboon roared loudly, and a crimson column of fire shot straight at the man opposite. Curse the doll, use protection. The man released the cursed doll, and a green light film was used instantly, blocking it, and then it was slid back by the impact. Wu Yu Kuang. You have already destroyed my 3 bases, what else do you want? The man in the cloak shouted. Patriarch Wei. Stop, can't we just calm down and have a good talk? After all, we have done something for your family before. At this time, a young man ran out of the building behind the man and directed at Wu Yu Kuang shouted. You can order me. Wu Yu Kuang sneered, sit down and talk? If you want to get better, Pluto, you should attack my eldest son first, he has nothing to do with me, I will teach you a little lesson, just interfere with your actions in Kanto. Forget it, now you are still making my young son unconscious, you let me talk to you? Dharma baboon, increase your strength. With his words, the fire column became a little thinner, but the color was also darker. The cursed doll cried out in pain, and the green light film trembled as if it would shatter soon. Pluto gritted his teeth fiercely. Seeing that the cursed doll couldn't hold up, he immediately threw a poke ball. Come out, Mariela. Humph, it's not appropriate to play 2 against 1. The woman standing beside Wu Yu Kuang also threw a poke ball and grabbed the pendant on her necklace at the same time. Karam, Mega Evolution. The dazzling brilliance attracted the eyes of everyone present. Pluto's pupils also shrank tightly. He had only heard about the evolution of Mega, but he didn't expect to actually see it. Eula, destroy the death light. Let's also come, destroy the death light. Boom. The 2 rays of light shot out at the same time, and they collided in the blink of an eye, causing a huge explosion. Round land shark, be careful. In the Kanto region, in a mansion in Rainbow City, a young man with red half-long hair was lying on the bed, suddenly shouted and sat up abruptly, panting violently and sweating coldly. The elf, who was lying on the side of the bed, was startled by the boy's sudden action, and when he saw the boy's appearance, he jumped onto the bed and comforted the boy. Round land shark. The boy's consciousness was still a little ignorant. Ao Feng. The door suddenly opened, and a beautiful woman and a young man who looked like the boy on the bed came in. The beautiful woman pulled the boy into her arms and hugged him tightly. Mom. The boy was stunned for a moment before he came back to his senses. He found that this was his room, and he was being held by his mother. After a little bit of memory, he understood what happened and said apologetically, I'm sorry. Mom, brother, let you worry. You'll be fine. The beautiful woman released her hands, touched her face twice, wiped away her tears and said with a smile. Where's Dad? The boy asked. He's negotiating terms with someone, and he should be back soon. The beautiful woman smiled. Dad is really angry this time. When I saw you being sent back like this, I immediately took the family elite out and almost took over the galaxy team's nest. The young man shrugged, and then a little star lit up in his eyes, but Dad was so handsome back then, so domineering. Don't just sigh here, hurry up and train me. At this moment, a heavy voice came from outside the door, and then a middle-aged man walked in. When he saw the teenager woke up, the lines on his face softened a lot. Just wake up, Ao Feng, don't take such risks again in the future. The man's name is Wu Yuquang, the patriarch of the Fire family. Wui family is also the chairman of the Huanyu company, and he is also a powerful trainer. A breeder, of course, as a member of a fighting family, whether it is the strength of training the elf or the exercise of her body is quite powerful, it is already equivalent to the quasi-king of the trainer level. The young man is Wui Feng, and the young man is A Feng's older brother, Wui Yun, who is 16 years old this year. Ao Feng lowered his head when he heard these words, and did not agree, nor did he say that he would not agree. He secretly asked himself in his heart, what would be his choice if the last time happened again? The answer is still to save, he doesn't want to regret it. Seeing that A Feng was silent, Yuan Lusha raised his head and called out twice, attracting A Feng's attention and hugging Yuan Lusha in his arms. It's great that you're fine, haha, stop licking. Forget it, there's nothing wrong with this, just take care to protect yourself in the future. Wu Yuquang sighed and said, Xiao Feng, it will be your 10th birthday in 3 days. After your birthday, you can go first. Stay with grandma for a few days and then start traveling. 3 days. Ao Feng was stunned for a moment. Have I slept for 7 days? You can still count, it seems that you are not stupid, haha. A Yun said with a smile. Go, did you say that about your brother? Kingzi glared at A Yun, and she couldn't stop laughing. Ao Feng looked at the round land shark in his arms. I'm going on a trip, are you willing to be my partner? Yuan Lusha blinked, then hugged Ao Feng and nodded. It seems that Xiao Feng has found a good starting elf this time. Luck and misfortune depend on each other, as expected. Wu Yuquang smiled and handed Ao Feng a elf ball. Ao Feng took the poke ball and touched the head of the round land shark. The round land shark turned into a red light and entered the poke ball. Without struggling, the poke ball became quiet. Then Ao Feng released Yuan Lu shark and played with Ao Feng. Hey? Why is there an egg here? Ao Feng didn't sit still, and fell backwards. He subconsciously wanted to support the bed. He didn't expect to encounter an elf egg, so he picked it up and put it in his hand, examining it. The egg, then looked at the others in the room. I don't know, it didn't seem to be there just now. A Yun said. Wu Yuquang and Kingzi also looked at the egg in amazement. It seems to have appeared suddenly. I don't know what kind of elf it is by looking at the lines, but since this egg is by your side, you can raise it. Let it be, it might be a good partner. A Yun scratched his head, why didn't I have such good luck back then? Xiao Feng had 2 little elves before he started traveling. It's not fair. It makes me so jealous. It's a matter of character. Brother, just wait, one day I will definitely defeat you. Ao Feng's eyes burned with the flame of fighting spirit. Okay, I'll be waiting for you. A Yun grinned and smiled, let's talk about it first. When you are 20 years old, whoever has the highest achievement will be the head of the family. Come on, don't even think about it, I won't rob you of the owner of the house, so don't think about being lazy. Ao Feng glanced at Ao Yun, he didn't know what Ao Yun's temperament was, and he yearned for freedom just like Yun. Drifting around, if it wasn't for the accident that happened to Ao Feng this time, she wouldn't have come back so soon, and he didn't want to stay at home and be the head of the house if he was killed. Listening to the conversation between the two, Wu Yuquang laughed secretly, it's not up to you to decide who will take this position. Didn't I get tricked back then? Ao Feng, do you still remember the energy that burst out of you that day? Wu Yuquang suddenly became serious and asked. Hey? Energy? What kind of energy? Ao Feng was stunned for a moment, with a blank expression on his face. Hey? Do you remember the situation at that time? Ao Feng frowned, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com then shook his head again, I don't know, I was standing in front of Yuan Lu shark, I felt the heat behind me, and then I passed out. Okay, A Feng just woke up, let him have a good rest. Kingzi stood up and pulled Wu Yuquang out, and A Yun made a face at A Feng and ran out. Standing in front of the mirror, A Feng looked at himself in the mirror, with red hair but a pair of icy blue pupils, but there was no dissonance at all. Resolute, 1.5 meters tall, but already very strong. I clenched my fists, my future is about to begin. After a while, the door was opened again, and an elf walked in with a dinner plate. Ao Feng hurriedly took it over, reached out and touched the head of the elf. It's hard work, it's almost a baby, Mom is really, it's not like I can't move, why do I want you to bring food? Almost the baby also responded and called a sound. While eating, Ao Feng stroked the elf egg. What kind of elf is it? Why did you come to me? No matter what kind of Pokemon you are, the days to come will depend on you. The novel Pets The Pride of the Elf will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform, and there will also be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the upper right to add a friend, and search for the official account Kdred and pay attention, hurry up. The novel Pokemon Ao Feng will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform, and there will also be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the upper right to add a friend, search for the public account Kdred and follow it, hurry up. As the light changed from strong to weak and then strong, Ao Feng's body quickly recovered during the rapid flow of time. Boom! Boom! Pft! The sound of collision sounded one after another. Come again! Ao Feng struggled to stand up from the ground, raised his fist and charged at the woman in front of him again. The dancing fists made their debut with strong whines, but they were all avoided by the woman lightly, and occasionally those who could not dodge would be blocked with their arms. Ao Feng swept the woman with a whip leg, but was avoided again, and was kicked out by the kick that came later. Okay, let's go here today. The woman sighed with relief, but it wasn't Ao Feng's mother Kingzi. Mom, you've been beaten too hard. You've been tortured like this every time. Ao Feng struggled to get up from the ground and complained. Can you blame me? Are you good at challenging me? Using all your strength is a respect for the challenger. Kingzi rolled her eyes and smiled meaningfully. Your progress is also fast, your strength and speed are all the same. It's okay. I can teach you all the fighting moves. What you need to look for is your own attack rhythm, and how to integrate the moves. It's up to you to what extent you can use them, and don't blindly attack. Not only in combat, but also in the battle of the elf. I need to practice more in the future, and it will be safer to travel outside when you are healthy. I don't know if there are more genes inherited from my mother. Not only does Ao Feng tend to look towards Kingzi, but also has the same preferences. He likes martial arts very much. He has to fight with Kingzi almost every day. The foundation in this regard is quite solid. Understood, mother, I will pay attention. Ao Feng nodded to his mother, picked up the round land shark and the elf egg who were standing beside him, and ran back to the room. What's your path like? I'm looking forward to it. Kingzi stood on the fighting arena and looked at Ao Feng's back, thinking to herself. Round land shark, let me see your skills. It's his birthday soon, and there is not much time for his last comfortable training. Now the most important thing is to get familiar with his little elves and master their skills. Better use in combat. Round land shark nodded, took a few steps forward, opened his mouth, a red fireball began to condense, and then spit out, the anger of the dragon. Then the round land shark ran forward and made a slamming action to the front. After stopping, it dashed forward again and collided, but the distance of dashing forward became much longer after this collision. A shock and a slam. Ao Feng touched his chin and pondered slightly. Roar! The round land shark roared, its tail turned silver white of steel, and turned around and slammed forward fiercely. It's just that the attack distance makes Ao Feng speechless. The tail is too short, there is no way. This is Steel Tail. Ao Feng's eyes lit up, and he was satisfied with the skills of Dragon's Fury and Steel Tail. He crouched down and touched the head of the round land shark who had just run back. Very good. What? Yuan Lu Sha closed his eyes and let out a loud cry, enjoying Ao Feng's stroking. During this time, you need to exercise the power of your skills, especially Dragon Fury and Iron Tail. Ao Feng said, seeing Yuan Lu Shark's confused look, he couldn't help but smile. Well, let me be clear, continuous launch and attack, experience the flow of energy in your body, and try to gather more energy next time. Round Land Shark nodded, and began to try to use skills according to Ao Feng's words. Fireballs were spewed out one by one. Ao Feng could see that the fireballs were increasing, but the time for each skill to be released was also increasing. Good job, keep going. Ao Feng encouraged by the side, noticing that he didn't care too much about the time issue. That was the next training content. I can't be idle even if you are working hard. He touched the elf egg that was wrapped in his clothes, walked to the side, picked up the gravity ring that had been prepared earlier and put it on his hands and feet. The black ring became transparent after putting it on. Originally, it had no weight at all, but once it was worn on the body, its 25 kilograms weight was immediately revealed. The gravity ring is a training tool specially researched by the Wu Yi family. In fact, it is mainly prepared for elves. It is only useful for human beings who exercise like Ao Feng. After all, ordinary people can't bear such a weight. There is also a restraint ring that is attached to it, which is used on the body to suppress energy. Under normal circumstances, it can suppress 50%, which has a strong effect on training. Ao Feng felt his body sank suddenly, and he almost fell on the ground. I added 100 kilograms at once, this is really self-abuse. After getting used to it for a while, Ao Feng was able to move reluctantly. I tried to throw punch after punch, and it didn't take long before I was sweating. His wish is a trainer, but he doesn't want to hide behind the elf all the time. They are friends, and friends should protect each other. He had seen flames appear in his mother's hands, and he also hoped that one day he could have his own energy. Yuan Lu Shark, let's do our best together. Ao Feng gasped and said, sweat splattered with every movement he made. Roar! Feeling Ao Feng's wool, Yuan Lu Shark's gaze became firmer, and the frequency of using his skills gradually increased. Under the sun, the elf egg lay there quietly, vibrating slightly, and the blue-purple brilliance circulated on it. It still looks like a little bit. In the shadow, stood two men, a woman and a big dog, watching the movements of Ao Feng and Yuan Lu Sha in his eyes. The older man nodded and said, what does it look like? I think he is much stronger than you. You forgot what you were like back then. I still remember it. The first battle was against me. You even. That the woman gave the man a blank look and said, but she couldn't speak halfway. Wang. A low cry came, clearly expressing what he meant. Feng Sugu, why not even you? The man smiled wryly, let go of his hand, and put his hand to the woman's ear and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, my wife, don't talk about what happened back then, the children are still here. Humph. The woman snorted and said nothing. Looks like I'm in danger. No, I'm going to training, and I must not let him overtake me so easily. Another man said, turned around and ran out, Mom, I'll go first. This kid is still so frizzy. The woman chuckled softly. Wife, I'm leaving first. The company still has things to deal with, so I'll leave the family to you. Well, go ahead, I'm here. The woman also nodded and watched the man and Feng Sugo leave. Yu Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and most popular serial works are all in Yu Reading. And amp, 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 LT/A and amp, 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 GT, and amp, 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 LT, A and amp, 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 GT, UU Reading. UU Reading www.ukansha.com and amp, 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 LT/A and amp, 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 GT. Ao Feng, that's all for today's training, ready to eat, your birthday dinner. Kingsley's voice came over, calling Ao Feng, who was focusing on training, back to God. For a moment of relaxation, Ao Feng felt as if there was a big mountain pressing down on him. He fell to the ground with a thud, and only sat up reluctantly with his hands on the ground. Yuan Lushan noticed Ao Feng's situation and stopped to practice. Leaned over to Ao Feng's side and looked at him with concern. "Mom, can't you wait until I finish training? It's uncomfortable to stop suddenly like this." Now Ao Feng was really uncomfortable, holding back the feeling that he couldn't exert himself. Round land shark, indicating that he is fine. "If you don't hurry up, you won't be able to eat for a while. He's coming over." Kingsley said lightly, as if none of this had anything to do with her. It didn't matter in the first place. "Let me take a break, a little." A flash of excitement flashed in Ao Feng's eyes, but after thinking about it, he simply lay down on the ground. After the training stopped, inertia came up, and he didn't want to move lazily. "Don't want gifts any later?" Kingsley's indifferent words came again. "That. If you wake up 1 minute later, don't want the poke ball prepared for you." Ao Feng's whole body was jolted, and he stood up after a fish hit. I know, I'll prepare right away. It's almost the same, Kingsley said to herself. Half an hour later, Ao Feng appeared in the living room, casually draped in a piece of clothing. His fiery red hair was wet with drops of water hanging from it, holding an elf egg in his arms, and the round land shark beside him followed closely. Seeing Ao Feng coming out, Ao Yun immediately ran over and teased, "Little master, you are finally willing to come out, and you've been dawdling like a girl for a long time. You're a girl." Ao Feng glared at Ao Yun and stretched out a hand, "Bring it here." "Che, it took you so long to come out and I thought you didn't want it anymore." He took out a box from the back and put it in Ao Feng's hand. "I got it while traveling in Hezhong some time ago. No, I've identified it. I don't know what it is, it's up to you to hatch." Ao Feng opened the box and couldn't help shaking his eyebrows. It was another egg, and when he looked at the one in his arms, he couldn't help but be speechless. He really thought he was a professional egg breeder. Seeing Ao Feng like this, Ao Yun stretched out his hand again. "Look at your expression, don't you want it? If you don't like it, give it back to me. If you don't want it, I want it." Ao Feng immediately took 2 steps back, closed the box and embraced it in his arms. "I still want to go back to the things I sent out. Do you have such a big brother?" "That's right." Ao Yun grinned, "But when I got this egg, it should have just been born, and it is expected to take a long time to hatch, so you can leave it at home, and my mother will take care of the general manager. Better than running around with you." "Yet." Ao Feng nodded and handed the box to Kingsley, asking her to help take care of it. Just as he was talking, there was an ethereal dragon roar from outside, and Ao Feng's eyes lit up. That guy came. Quickly ran outside, and sure enough, a mini dragon was slowly falling down in the sky. As the height decreased, the person sitting on the mini dragon gradually revealed his appearance. He was 8 or 9 years old, his long purple hair fluttered in the wind, his delicate facial features were like those of a woman, his skin was very fair, and he looked very handsome. The body is quite thin, and it is estimated that he will be KO in the moment of arm wrestling with ordinary people. The eyes with the same color as his hair flickered with wicked brilliance, but if anyone could see his heart, he could see that there was endless indifference hidden in the depths of his eyes, as if frozen for thousands of miles, unable to approach. When the boy's eyes fell on the red-haired boy running down below, the indifference quietly melted away, and the corners of his mouth evoked a smile. When he was less than half a meter from the ground, he jumped off the mini dragon and almost fell on the ground. Ao Feng hurriedly grabbed the person's thin shoulders with both hands and stabilized his figure. "Feng Che Chenexin. How many times have I told you that if your body is not good, don't act handsome, if you lower it a little, it won't be so good, jumping like this. Come down and fall to your death. So you didn't die. I thought I was going to spend this birthday alone." The smile on Chen Xin's face became more intense, and the cold and evil charm in her eyes was completely replaced by warmth. "Cut, you didn't die, how could I die in front of you?" Ao Feng released his hand, but his eyes were full of emotion. He knew from Kingsley that when Chen Xin saw Ao Feng being carried back and got the news of Ao Feng's condition, he immediately rode a mini dragon to the Shanao area to find his aunt Zyrna to find a way to save him, but it didn't take long for Ao Feng to wake up, and he came back to celebrate his birthday with him. He stretched out his hand and said with a beating smile, "Nephew, have you prepared a present for your uncle? Dear nephew, hurry up and bring it to honor your uncle and me." Hearing the second half of the sentence, the smile on Chen Xin's face immediately froze, the corners of her mouth twitched constantly, and flames burned in her eyes. She was angry. "I don't know where to take out a folding stool, fold it up and cover Ao Feng and shoot it down. You are the nephew, your whole family are nephews, Wu Yi Ao Feng. I will shoot you to death." "Ah! Murdered my uncle! Help!" Seeing this, Ao Feng ran around in the yard, but the smile on his face did not diminish at all. According to his original physical fitness, Chen Xin simply chased after him. I can't catch him, but who made him put on a gravity ring when he died 2 days ago? The burden on his body greatly increased, he was caught up after a few runs, then he was shot twice, and then he ran with all his strength, and then got caught up. Called Nozuanade Hui Yutri. Ugh! The Mini Long looked helplessly at the two figures chasing and running on the ground. He was no stranger to this situation, but the round land shark who followed him tilted his head and watched the two live treasures running back and forth. After a while, two whirlpools appeared in the ice, the legendary soldiers who were defeated without a fight. Well, that's good. Not only is it easy to carry, it can be used to sit and beat people, it can also increase the attack distance, and it can be hidden in the street and popularized among the people. It is indeed the legendary folding stool that is also called the three major weapons of the people along with bricks and watermelon knives. A must-have for home travel. I didn't expect Chen Xin to understand the essence so quickly. Ao Feng's mother touched her chin with one hand, nodded her head in admiration. Hey, it's better to be a wife, you don't need any weapons. Wu Yuquang sighed. Yeah, I don't need a weapon, that's because I think I can take care of you with my fist. As she said, Kingzi compared her own fist, and Wu Yuquang's neck shrank when she saw it, and then Kingzi's fist just put it down. Just when Wu Yuquang was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he was shocked to see Kingzi took out a huge frying pan and said softly, "Of course, if you want to try a weapon, I also can use it against you, don't you think?" "No, no need, wife, you are so gentle, why would you use this?" Wu Yuquang sneered. Ayun, who was standing on the side, blushed, but he didn't dare to make a sound. He knew that his father was violent and domineering, but he was a sturdy bronchitis. His mother had higher force than his father, so there was nothing he could do. UU Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and most popular serial works are all in UU Reading. And amp, 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 LT/A and amp, 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 GT, and amp, 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 LT, A and amp, 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 GT, UU Reading. UU Reading www.ukansha.com and amp, 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 LT/A and amp, 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 GT. AO Feng. Stop for me. I promise, I will never kill you. Fortunately, Chen Xian's physique was not very good. After running for a while, she was out of breath and was left behind by Ao Feng. Cut, the fool will stop. You were saying that you were going to shoot me to death, but now you are saying that you won't kill me. You are contradicting yourself. I don't believe you. Ao Feng turned around and made a face at Chen Xian. I said no, kill you, but I didn't say, don't kill you. Give it to me, stop. Stand on your face, you genius. Ao Feng turned his head and said, one of them didn't pay attention, he tripped over a stone under his feet, and fell forward, and the elf egg in his hand also flew out. Ao Feng quickly hugged the egg into his arms, curled up into a ball to protect the elf egg, and rolled on the ground to stabilize his body. Hey, be careful! As soon as Ao Feng turned around, he saw Chen Xian rushing over, holding up his folding stool with both hands. Because it was too fast to stop the car, the whole person rushed forward. Ao Feng used one hand to protect the elf egg, and his free arm caught Chen Xian's body, preventing him from lying on the ground. His only feeling was lightness. Chen Xian was too thin, and Ao Feng could support it with one hand. At the same time, with the sound of Duan, Ao Feng's head was slapped hard by the folding stool, and Ao Feng could clearly feel that a large bag was slowly bulging. Ao Feng! Are you all right? Chen Xian quickly got up, threw away the folding stool, and looked at the big bag on Ao Feng's head in a panic. He was chasing and fighting before, and he was measured with how much force he used, and it only hurt a little, but just now, he subconsciously used more force than all his strength. It's all right, who am I, it's just a bag, and it will disappear soon. Ao Feng waved his hand, stood up, dusted off his body, stretched out a hand, and made a pair of I'm strong look. He and Chen Xian looked at each other, and then both burst out laughing. Regarding the fact that Ao Feng called Chen Xian's nephew, it was not Ao Feng's random name, but a true uncle-nephew relationship, which was related to Chen Xian's life experience. Feng Che Chen Xin, the young master of the superpower family of the 17 major families. Chen Xian's mother, Shuanghan Yushang, is the youngest daughter of the patriarch of the 5 major families, Shuanghan, and the cousin of Shirana in the Shanao region. Later, because of family marriage, she married Feng Che Jingran, and then gave birth to Chen Xian, but because of the dystocia, Chen Xian's body was congenitally inadequate, and because the relationship between Feng Che Jingran and Shuanghan Yushang was not very good, Chen Xian always prepared being left out. The body has been weak and has not been improved very well. As a direct descendant of the superpower family, Chen Xian was born with superpowers and should have inherited the position of the patriarch, but Feng Che did not care about his existence at all. Yu Chong died when Chen Xian was 7 years old. After that, Feng Che, despite the opposition of the family, brought his lover outside Ju Min back to the family, and brought back a child who was 5 years older than Chen Xian, Ju Min Yup. Chen Xian's life was even more difficult. Before, he was only neglected. With his mother around, he was able to eat and clothe himself, but now his status has plummeted, and he has to be bullied by Ju Minyi every day. The young Chen Xian also made a fight, but unfortunately the result. Fortunately, she was brought to the Wei family by Qingzi, who was a sister to Yushang shortly after. Wu Yuquang also took good care of him and treated him as his own son. And Ao Feng and Chen Xian have been playing together since they were very young, and their relationship is also extraordinary. They were inseparable almost every day, saying nothing. The coldness in Chen Xian's heart would only melt in front of Ao Feng. Chen Xian's birthday was originally on the same day as Ao Feng's, but for Ao Feng's sake, she had to postpone her birthday to celebrate with Ao Feng. Ao Feng's father is the same generation as the previous patriarch of the Frost-Cold family, which means that Ao Feng and Shirana are the same generation, and Shirana is Chenexin's aunt, so even Ao Feng is Chenexin's uncle. Of course, Chen Xian, who was 2 weeks older than Ao Feng, would never admit it, and every time Ao Feng mentioned it, Chen Xian would abuse him. Hey! Ao Feng, who was laughing, suddenly froze, as if he heard something, but it was not real, making him not sure if it was his hallucinations. Seeing the change in Ao Feng's expression, Chen Xian also stopped. What's wrong? Ao Feng shrugged. Did you hear anything just now? No. Chen Xian shook her head honestly. Is it really an illusion? Ao Feng shook his head. The sound of nothingness just now made his heart feel a little excited and warm. It shouldn't be just a hallucination. While hesitating, Chen Xian suddenly said, Ao Feng, look at the egg in your arms. Ao Feng hurriedly lowered his head and held the elf egg with both hands. Sure enough, the top was emitting light. When Ao Feng concentrated his energy on the elf egg, the previous voice appeared again, but it was still very vague and incomprehensible. Are you willing to be my partner? For some reason, Ao Feng said such a sentence. As soon as the voice fell, the light on the elf egg suddenly became stronger, making it impossible for others to see the situation inside. This is... Wu Yuquang said hesitantly after seeing Ao Feng's situation in his eyes. Yes, this is the elf's choice for the trainer. The ability to hear the voice from the elf egg shows that Ao Feng is fully recognized and can communicate with his mind. It seems that it will be Ao Feng's closest partner in the future. Look! Elf! The eggs are about to hatch. Kingzi said with a smile. A purple gold powder-like brilliance suddenly exploded in the rich blue light. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com slowly fell in the air, and the white light quickly weakened. A young elf with a body composed of blue and black with purple patterns appeared in Ao Feng's arms. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he had not woken up. Eyes with purple pupils scrutinized Ao Feng, and then Ao Feng thought of a tender voice, Dad! Dad! Ao Feng was already a little stupid, and he didn't know what to respond to, but it was obvious that Ao Feng was already overjoyed. Oh my god, Leo Lu, it's still only shining, how can this kid be so lucky? Ayun shouted with wide eyes. Luck is also a part of strength. Kingzi's eyes were full of smiles. Xiao Feng has wanted a Leoru since he was a child, but unfortunately the number of such Pokemon is too rare, and it is basically impossible to find it with our family's power. I didn't expect it to happen like this. Leo Lu? What about the energy of that day? Wu Yuquang's eyes flashed and he murmured, but Kingzi stopped his words with his eyes, and immediately changed the conversation, a perfect birthday present. Ao Feng had already returned to his senses. Did you speak just now? That's not talking, it's telepathy. Wu Yuquang's voice came. Ao Feng put his hands under Leo Lu's armpit, lifted him up, looked up at him. Leo Lu, I'll call you Xiaolu in the future, would you like to travel with me? And I'm not your father. Just call my brother. Note, in the future, Xiaolu will be used instead of Lielu. Note, regarding the flashing elves, everyone knows that the flashing elves are very rare. There will not be too many in this article, and there will not be many protagonists. They will appear in the early stage, and I hope you don't question them. Brother, brother. Leo Lu nodded and shouted happily. Ah! He called you Dad. Chen Xin looked at Ao Feng with a smirk, and nodded slightly. Well, although he's not tall enough, he's old enough, not as young and handsome as me. Ao Feng raised his eyebrows, hugged Xiao Lu in his arms, and smiled instead of anger. Oh? Yes, I'm old enough, so why don't you call me uncle, nephew Chenexin, come and call me uncle. With an expression like I'm young and much more handsome than you, Chen Xin's body froze, but when she turned around to burst out, her head was held down. Come on, uncle, touch his head. Ao Feng immediately ran away when Chen Xin didn't respond, and when Chen Xin came back to his senses, he saw that Ao Feng had already walked away with Xiao Lu in his arms. Just as he was about to chase after him, he saw that Ao Feng threw a pendant behind him, and hurriedly caught it. A gift for you, you should know what it is, you must bring it with you. Ao Feng waved his hand towards the back. Chen Xin flicked the jade pendant on the pendant with her finger. It is a warm jade that is a special product of the vibrant forest. It is very rare, and the output is almost zero. It often has the effect of enhancing physique. As a son of a big family, he certainly knows what it is, and also understands why Ao Feng must follow the last Wei family's action. Xiaolu, why did your elf egg suddenly appear on my bed? He asked while walking back with Xiaolu. Xiaolu sat on Ao Feng's arms, his legs were dangling in the air. When he heard Ao Feng's question, he raised his head and looked at Ao Feng. I don't know. I don't know. Ao Feng was stunned, and continued to ask, what did you just tell me in the elf egg? Is there? Xiaolu thought for a while, then shook his head. I can't remember. I saw my brother when I woke up, and I felt that the wave guides between us matched very well. Xiao Feng, don't ask. Before coming here, it was his instinctive action, and he didn't know it. Kingzi looked at Xiaolu and was very envious. As a member of a fighting family, Lucario is her best friend. One of the elf I hope to get, not to mention the one who uses Liu Lu as the initial elf like Ao Feng, of course, she will not show it. She waved to Chen Xin behind Ao Feng, come in quickly, ready to eat. Chen Xin put on the pendant that Ao Feng gave him, greeted the mini dragon, and replied, got it. After the meal, Ao Feng Chenexin left with her elf and went to the place specially prepared for the elf by the family to exchange feelings with the elf. At this time, mutual understanding is the most important. If it's Liu Lu, then the energy that burst out that day should also be a waveguide, but with so much energy output in an instant, how could Xiao Feng just sleep for a few days? In the room, Wu Yuquang and Qing sitting together, Xi said with a frown. Kingzi pinched Wu Yuquang's arm and glared at him fiercely, what are you talking about, don't you want Xiao Feng to die? You understand, that's not what I meant. Wu Yuquang looked thoughtful. It's already clear from the records left by those who have a waveguide in the past, if people who have awakened their ability use a lot of waveguides, they will overuse it. It leads to death, not to mention that Xiao Feng has not awakened yet, so it is incomprehensible that he released his energy and ended up safe and sound. We should not let Hyuka and the others come over and talk about the situation that day. Okay, I've said it so many times, and I'm about to draw it for you. Kingzi rolled her eyes helplessly, don't think too much about these things, it's impossible to get the answer now, just let it take its course. Wu Yuquang sighed, and then seemed to think of something again. Wife, do you think the ability will disappear? Why did the elders investigate when Ao Feng was in a coma, but couldn't find anything? It's hard to say. After all, no one has experienced this kind of situation. Whether Xiao Feng can use the waveguide in the future depends on his fate, but what if his ability disappears? After all, it's just an auxiliary ability, Kingzi said. But he was very open, I will accompany the two of them to Zhengzhen town tomorrow. If you have something to do with your company, I will come back to help you when they leave. Well, you should be more thoughtful and go along. Wu Yuquang agreed. The night passed quickly, and the next morning, Yun sat in the helicopter and waved his head outside. Xiao Feng Chenexin, I'll take a step first, you have to go on a journey, I won't stop. Those who follow in my footsteps, waiting for the day when you surpass me. You have to work hard, don't let me surpass it so easily, that would be too boring. Ao Feng waved his fist in the air, watching the helicopter fly farther and farther in the air, until he disappeared from sight. It is not easy for Ao Feng to catch up with Ayun. Ayun has been traveling for more than 3 years and has already won a championship in a regional competition. Now he is traveling in the Hezhong area to climb higher mountains. Xiao Feng, let's go too. Kingzi greeted. Got it. Ao Feng took Xiao Lu to the plane and pulled Chen Xin by the way. Looking through the window, looking at the gradually smaller house, Ao Feng's heart became more and more excited. After waiting for 7 or 8 years, I finally have the opportunity to realize my dream. Leaving the metropolis, there were obviously many more trees. Looking down from the plane, all that caught my eye were the vast green. The flying elf that appeared from time to time aroused the yearning in Ao Feng's heart. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Zhengzhen town is not very far from Rainbow City. It is only separated by Jiaban Forest and Jiaban City. It takes about half a day to see it by plane. The place where Ao Feng's grandma lives is a very quiet little yard with all kinds of flowers planted in it. Ao Feng often comes here to play, so it doesn't feel strange at all. As the plane slowly landed, several people jumped off at a time. An old woman was waiting for them at the door. Grandma. As soon as he landed on the ground, Ao Feng threw himself into the arms of the old lady. You must know that Ao Feng's grandmother doted on him very much. Others also said hello. Well, darling Xiao Feng, I'm here to see Grandma. Grandma gently touched Ao Feng's head with her hands. Yes, Grandma, after staying here for a while, I will start traveling. Ao Feng said excitedly, as if he was showing off something. Okay, my good grandson has grown up too. Grandma let go of her hand and looked at Chen Xin. You should go with Ao Feng too, take care of each other, don't stand, come in. Seeing Chen Xin's somewhat lonely expression, Ao Feng walked up to him, patted him on the shoulder, and pointed at himself. He didn't say anything, but the meaning was obvious. You are my brother, and my family is yours family. As soon as he entered the room, Ao Feng suddenly remembered something, picked up Xiao Lu, and released Yuan Lu Sha, Grandma, they are my partners. Yuan Lusha opened his mouth wide and smiled at his grandmother, while Xiaolu nodded calmly. It seemed that he was very cautious towards people other than Ao Feng. Grandma looked at the two elves and was a little surprised when she saw Xiaolu, but she quickly recovered. It's a very good starting pixie. If you train well, it will definitely be a rare and powerful elves in the future. After Ao Feng and his group stayed for a while, they went to visit Dr. Damu's research institute. This is what Ao Feng must do every time he comes here. Dr. Damu is a member of the ordinary Damu family. He is also a world-famous Pokemon researcher. He is a very authoritative person and one of the pillars of the Damu family. At the same time, he is also a very respected elder by Ao Feng and the others. Since we had called Dr. Amu in advance, when the group arrived at the research institute, Dr. Aji was already waiting outside. Dr. Aji, long time no see. Kingzi smiled politely. Haha, Kingzi, I remember that the last time we met was around this time last year. Dr. Damu felt like the grandfather next door, wearing a white lab coat, grey hair and a very friendly smile on his face. Dr. Damu. Ao Feng and Chen Xin bowed slightly and said hello. Ah, the two of you are here too. I haven't seen you for a year, and you've grown a lot taller. Dr. Damu turned his attention to the two of Ao Feng, and then noticed the two elves beside Ao Feng, staring wide. He closed his eyes and said, This is the round land shark in the Liuoru and Chenao areas. They are all very rare elves. How did you get them? Dr. Damu's reaction made both Ao Feng and Chenexin laugh. They couldn't help but think of what happened when Dr. Damu saw Chenexin's mini dragon a few years ago. Just as Ao Feng was about to say something, he saw that Dr. Damu had already crouched down and stretched out his hand to touch Yuan Lu Shark and Xiaolu. Yuan Lusha closed his eyes comfortably, but Xiaoluo dodged away, grabbed Ao Feng's trousers, and looked at Dr. Damo with a very wary look. Dr. Damo smiled awkwardly, and Ao Feng hurried to smooth things out. Dr. Damo, don't worry about it, Xiaoluo is like this to people he has never seen before. Once you are familiar with it, you will be very close. It doesn't matter, the elves have their own personalities, which is normal. Dr. Damo waved his hand and didn't seem to care at all, but Xiao Feng, can you let me observe and study them? Ao Feng scratched his head and looked down at the two elves. Well, if they don't mind, that's fine. Okay. That's settled. Dr. Damo stood up and punched his left palm with his right hand. Ao Feng, Chen Xin, you are all 10 years old, you should be traveling soon, my grandson Xiao Mao is a week old. The next birthday, after that, he and a few teenagers are going to collect Pokemon and start traveling, then you can go with them and live here for the first time. Ao Feng smiled mysteriously and said, I don't care, but I don't know if my grandma will agree. Dr. Amu seemed to remember something, and shrank his neck. Forget it, you can live with her, just come every day. Dr. Aji, do you intend to keep us standing here? Kingzi interjected. Dr. Damo was stunned for a moment, and then smiled embarrassedly. I'm sorry, I will be excited when I see that I haven't studied elves, and I'll get carried away. Please come in, please come in. As soon as he walked into the research institute, Ao Feng saw the Jenny turtle, the frog seed and the little fire dragon running around and playing in it. They were very healthy in terms of coat color and body size. This is the elf for the new trainer. It's been cultivated very well. Kingzi squatted down and touched the elf's head. Being familiar with the various habits of the elf, she quickly made the elf comfortable. Call. These elves are all carefully cultivated by me. I will not be sloppy in the elves given to newcomers. Dr. Damu said with a proud look. Ao Feng's round land shark quickly became familiar with the original elves, and when they played together, Xiaoluo still stayed by Ao Feng's side, watching them quietly. Chenexin, let out your mini dragon too. Ao Feng suggested, and Chen Xin also released her own Pokemon. You can play by yourself. You are familiar with this place. I still have some research to do, so I'm sorry. Dr. Damu is always so busy. Dr. Damu, can we go with you? Ao Feng asked. Some of Dr. Damu's research is very interesting, especially for people like Ao Feng who care a lot about elves. Dr. Damu nodded, come on if you are interested, you can be my helper. Although Dr. Damu's research has its own patent rights, he is not worried that Ao Feng and the others will leak the research results. Hey! Dr. Damu, that Pikachu! As soon as he entered the research room, Ao Feng found a Pikachu hidden in the shadows, and looked at them with hostility in his eyes. I found it some time ago. At that time, he was seriously injured. After I treated it, he was very alienated. I don't know why I felt it was special, but I didn't find anything after researching it. I was called several times by him. That's it. Ao Feng tried to get closer, but saw Pikachu keep retreating, and shook his head helplessly. Turn around and start researching with Dr. Aji. The time of concentration always passed quickly, and by the time the three of them regained their senses, it was already completely dark outside. Yet, I should go back, or my grandma will be angry. Dr. Damu, I'll go first. Ao Feng greeted him and dragged Chen Xin and Xiao Lu to run out. This kid. Dr. Damu smiled, then lowered his head and continued to work. Ao Feng. As soon as he ran to the living room, Ao Feng was called out. Looking in the direction of the voice, a young man in a purple long-sleeved t-shirt was standing beside the sofa. With his hands on his chest, looking at Ao Feng and Chen Xin. Oh? It's Xiao Mao, long time no see. Ao Feng said. Chen Xin nodded as a greeting. The children of the aristocratic family still knew each other a little, but they knew very little before they went on a trip. After all, no one would pay attention to a guy who has no reputation. Just like Ao Feng, I have only heard of a few people now. Similarly, when someone mentions the younger generation of the Wei family, they definitely think of A Yun, not A Feng, and A Feng and Xiao Mao, who are also the children of one of the 5 top families, have also met several times under the leadership of their parents. Second rate. Is this your elf? I'll be 10 years old soon. How about I get my initial elf? Let's have a fight with me then. Xiao Mao glanced at Xiaolu, then turned to Ao Feng, looking at Ao Feng's eyes with burning intent to fight. Ao Feng looked at Xiao Mao carefully, and said with a smile, "Okay, I haven't experienced a pixie battle yet. Our first battle, I wouldn't let it go. Humph, whoever asks you to release water, I will definitely win." Xiao Mao raised his fist and waved it as if to demonstrate. However, Ao Feng turned around and waved his hand, and called out to Yuan Lu Shat, "The battle is in the future. Now I have to go back. Bye-bye." Before he finished speaking, he and Chen Xin disappeared from the room. Middle. Day by day, staying in a quiet place, Ao Feng's life is not peaceful at all. He gets up early every day to start training and knows his elf practice skills and exercise. After breakfast, I started to practice with Kingzi, and I went to Dr. Aji to help at noon until I came back to rest in the evening. Since he was about to leave soon, it was basically impossible to practice against each other, so now Ao Feng seized every minute of time, and only stopped when he was out of strength. And Kingzi also constantly taught him some fighting skills and psychological essentials, and every time he beat Ao Feng out, he would tell him something. Of course, these are just oral narrations. It is up to Ao Feng to understand how much he can understand. A week later, Ao Feng was so excited that he didn't sleep well all night. He got up at 5 o'clock. He originally planned to call Chen Xin in the morning, but when he woke up, he found that Ching Xi was waiting in front of his door. Ao Feng was about to say something, but was blocked by Ching Xi. "Let's go, continue practicing with me this morning." "But, Mom, today is the day I leave." Ao Feng shouted with a frown. Kingzi, however, showed no mercy at all. "Want to leave early? It's okay, just beat me, otherwise give me honest training until I'm satisfied." Ao Feng clenched his fists, said nothing, and followed Kingzi out silently, as if a child wanted to go out to play, but was told by his parents that he had to complete his homework before going out. Walking to a grass, the two of them just stood, and Ao Feng started a rapid attack. He also knew that it was impossible to defeat Kingzi Hedan with his current strength. The only way for him to win was to be surprised at the beginning. Attack when you are not ready. It's a pity that his wishful thinking didn't work after all. Kingzi was far stronger than she thought, and with just a few simple strokes, he neutralized Ao Feng's attack and knocked him out. Even so, Ao Feng didn't give up. He was knocked off again and again, attacked again, and the impact or something didn't cause him much damage. Kingzi was not idle either. Every time she called Fei Ao Feng, she would simply say a few words, but it was uncertain whether Ao Feng would pay attention or not. Strength and speed are important, but have you ever thought about what is more important? The moves are messed up, what are you thinking? What about your rhythm? Do you want to beat me with such a fast break? The more anxious you are, the more impossible it is to win, and your strength is not displayed at all. When you are at a disadvantage, what do you need most? Such words didn't stop until 8 o'clock in the morning. Kingzi looked at Ao Feng, who was panting on the ground, and her eyes were full of helplessness. "Let's be here today, go back to eat breakfast and set off. Turn away." Kingzi was still very measured, she didn't delay Ao Feng's departure time at all, and even set aside time for breakfast. Sitting at the dining table, Ao Feng was speechless when he saw the milk in front of him. He didn't like to drink it since he was a child, but he was forced to drink a cup by Kingsley every day. The pitiful gaze glanced at Kingsley, but Kingsley shook her head ruthlessly and looked at Chen Xin and her grandmother. All she got was the reply of "I can't help it." Ao Feng could only squeeze his nose and drink it. "Ao Feng, Chen Xin, I have prepared the things for you." The illustrated book and all kinds of pokeballs are put into the outermost layer of the backpack. The sleeping bag, change of clothes, fire and other daily utensils are all inside. Just look at it. Standing at the door, Kingsley handed the 2 backpacks to the 2, then pointed to the back, "Bring them with you too." 2 little elves walked out from behind Kingsley. They were almost dolls and big milk jars. Almost the dolls are okay, but the big milk jug is fine. Ao Feng's mouth twitched, and if they are included in the team, then we will have fewer elves to fight. No, you have to take it with you. As for the alliance, you don't need to worry about it, it was approved by the alliance. As for why this is what happened after Ao Feng fell into a coma last time, your father almost took away the Galaxy team, and finally not only did they blackmail compensation, but they also signed an agreement with Hades, not allowing them to enter the Kanto region to capture elves within 5 years, which relieved a lot of pressure on the alliance. When they came to express their gratitude, we proposed this. The conditions, they also agreed. And we use our own special ones to prevent the people from the alliance from spying on your elves and the situation, and we will command and summarize the strength. Then I have almost a baby, give Chen Xin the big milk tank, he still needs milk every day. Ao Feng said tentatively. Kingsley glanced at Ao Feng, as if she wanted to see through him. Yes, but you don't want to escape to drink milk, Chen Xin, this task is left to you, supervise that he must drink a glass of milk every day. Tell me if he doesn't obey, and I'll take care of him when he comes back. As ordered. Mom, don't worry, I will take good care of him. Chen Xin replied with a smile. Ah! No! Ao Feng screamed. Kingsley and her grandmother kept sending them to the door, constantly exhorting, Xiao Feng, although your first 2 elves are not fire elements, there must be fire elements in your team every time. It is a necessary requirement as a direct descendant of the fire family, and having a Yun on top of you has already helped you relax a lot, you must pay attention to this, otherwise you can't say it to the elders of the family. Ao Feng nodded and said that he must conquer the fire-type elves. The fire-type family's ability to train elves to use the fire-type is definitely the best in the world. He would be stupid if he didn't use such resources. After finishing the necessary things, Kingsley's topic turned to her concern for children. Be careful on the road, don't provoke a large group of elves, you can't handle it with your current strength, you must eat 3 meals a day. Eat, you can't miss a meal, you are growing up, wear more clothes when it's cold, don't freeze yourself, and be sure to call home. No matter what kind of powerhouse, as a mother, you will have endless worries about your child. Listening to the mother's request, the eyes of both of them are a little red. Ao Feng had long forgotten the unpleasantness of the morning. After all, Kingsley didn't really delay his schedule, just dragged him to fight for a while. Although he didn't understand his mother's intention, he would never really hate your mother. Mom, Grandma, go back, we're leaving. Well, let's go, remember my words. Kingsley also showed reluctance in her eyes. Ao Feng and Chen Xin took 2 steps back, and then turned to leave, daring not to look back, for fear that their tears would flow out. The 2 of them kept watching Ao Feng and Chen Xin disappear from sight before they looked back. They quickly controlled their emotions. Ching Xi helplessly looked at Ao Feng's grandma. Mom, let me do this, is it okay to do this? You can only be the villain, and he won't blame you for anything. Now give him some vague pointers. Even if he doesn't understand now, he can't be wrong. Let's go back. Grandma said a few words, turned around and walked back to the yard. Chen Xin, what are you going to do in the future? Ao Feng suddenly asked as the 2 walked on the road. Chen Xin's footsteps stagnated, and Sen Han's light appeared in his eyes. He knew what Ao Feng meant, but he really didn't want to think about those things again. Let's talk about it later. Thinking about these things now will only add to the troubles. But if I had to choose now, I wouldn't go back, and I no longer belonged there from the moment I left. Ao Feng patted his head. Really, what are you talking about now? It made the atmosphere so depressed. It's okay, let's talk about this later, as long as you know that no matter what you choose, I will support you by your side. Ao Feng was very clear about what happened at that time. If Chen Xin still had some feelings for his father when Chen Xin's mother was still alive, after Feng Che brought the woman back, he had already completely treated him disappointed. After the death of Shuang Han Yushang, he would have received the attention of the elders of the clan by virtue of his identity as the son of Chen Xin, giving him better conditions. But after Zhu Mingxuan and Zhu Minyi came, Feng Che Jingran completely ignored him, turning a blind eye to the situation of the two bullying Chen Xin, and also wanted to put pressure on the elders and strictly forbid them from taking care of them. In the end, Chen Xin could only be taken out under the secret arrangement of the elders, but he was completely chilled to his father. From the family point of view, Chen Xin should go back. If he doesn't go back, I am afraid that the Feng Che family will be in danger. From the point of view of personal feelings, Ao Feng also does not want Chen Xin to go back. Facing such a father and such a family, I am afraid that he will see it will be uncomfortable. Okay, I'm fine, let's go quickly, Xiao Mao and the others will all leave in a while. Chen Xin shook her head, as if she had thrown all the unhappiness out of her mind, and then laughed. He was still lucky, he left a prison and got a warm home. With such a brother, what else is there to be sad about? As for the family, go to him, one day I, Feng Che Chenexin, will make them regret it. Ao Feng took out 3 poke balls from his backpack, pinned them to his belt, and threw 2, Xiaolu, Yuan Luo Shark, come out. After Xiaolu was released, he jumped on Ao Feng's shoulder and rubbed his head affectionately. Brother, it's so boring inside, so let me stay outside, okay? Ao Feng fondly rubbed Xiaolu's head. Yes. Ao Feng turned to Round Lu Shark again. Round Lu Shark just smiled at Ao Feng without complaining, and rubbed Ao Feng's hand affectionately. When I can let you out in the future, I'll let you out to breathe. I'm sorry, but I always lock you in. Ao Feng said apologetically. Yuan Lu Sha shook his head with a smile, and called out to Ao Feng a few times. Before Ao Feng understood what it meant, Xiaolu took the lead and said, Brother, please take me in the future. It's really inconvenient to always take us outside. What's the matter? What did Yuan Luo Shark say just now? Xiaolu pursed his lips. He said he's fine, it's good to be by your side, and staying outside all the time will bring you trouble. I'm sorry brother, I shouldn't have asked for that just now. What nonsense are you talking about? We are partners, there is no need to be troublesome. Ao Feng crouched down and hugged the 2 little elves hard. Okay, let's go, there is still a battle today. The 2 men and 1 elf walked forward while talking, and soon reached the door of Dr. Damu's research institute, just in time to see 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, coming out of the research institute. Xiao Mao was inside, looking very happy holding the Jenny turtle, while the other 2 were holding the seeds of the wonderful frog and the little fire dragon. You have already received the elf, it seems that I came just right. Ao Feng smiled. Xiao Mao's gaze shifted from the Jenny turtle to Ao Feng. You're here, just right, let's start. There is a battlefield in the Doctoral Research Institute. Hearing that there was a battle, the eyes of the other 2 lit up. It was definitely a lucky thing to be able to see the battle around them just after they got the elf. What kind of elf is this? I've never seen it before. The girl holding the seeds of the wonderful frog asked, looking at the small road in Ao Feng's arms, her eyes twinkling with small stars. She took out the elf picture book and found no information. The result of He is Liu Lu, a very rare elf. It's normal not to have it in the illustrated book. Ao Feng replied politely, and then said to Xiao Mao, let's go. Ao Feng and Xiao Mao stood on both sides of the field respectively, and Chen Xin stood on the sidelines as the referee. The format of the game is 1v1. If one of the elves loses the ability to fight, the opponent wins. Xiaolu, this is our first official battle, we have to do our best. Ao Feng said to Xiaolu, who was standing in front of him. Roundland Shark also shouted to cheer for the road. Well, I will definitely win. Xiaolu looked back at Ao Feng, and he could see the fighting spirit in his eyes. Jenny Turtle, let's do our best. Xiao Mao was also cheering. Jenny. Jenny Turtle also responded imposingly. Then let's start, Jenny Turtle, use the water gun. Xiao Mao waved his arm and instructed the Jenny Turtle to say. Jenny opened his mouth, and a jet of water spurted out. Ao Feng raised his eyebrows, the energy gathering speed is very fast, Xiaolu, move at a high speed to avoid, get close to the past. Kick with explosive flames. After these few days of running in, Ao Feng has learned a lot about Xiaolu's skills. What makes him most helpless is that Xiaolu now only has melee skills, and he must be close to be effective. Fortunately, there is a skill of high-speed movement. Xiaolu turned into a phantom, dodged before the arrival of the water gun, and at the same time quickly approached the Jenny Turtle, and he was about to get close to him. Jenny Turtle, retract into the shell and turn at high speed. Xiao Mao gave an order quickly. Hearing this order, Jenny Turtle was stunned for a moment, but fortunately, he recovered quickly, got into the shell, turned at a high speed but was useless, and was kicked out by the explosive flames of the path. It's so fast! Xiao Mao said in surprise. As a referee, Chen Xin sees this very clearly. It can be said that the two have their own advantages. Ao Feng Sheng is more familiar with Xiaolu, and there will be no pause in information transmission. Xiao Mao is better than Jenny Turtle's ability. After being trained by Dr. Dama for so long, he will definitely not be weak. Not very few, not a little bit stronger than Xiaolu, who was just born. As for who can win, it depends on who can take advantage of it. The turtle fell to the ground, and then stood up. The defense of the shrinking shell did not cause him much damage. The turtle continued to attack with the water gun. Xiao Mao still used the same tactics as before. Ao Feng pondered for a while, and looked at Xiaolu, move at high speed. In the same situation as last time, will the result be the same? Seeing Xiaolu approaching, Xiao Mao raised a smile on the corner of his mouth. It's now. Shrink the shell and turn at high speed. Have you seized the moment? It's really accurate, and when it rotates, it happens to be when the trail is close to the body. However, will I make you wish? Xiaolu, there is a flash of lightning. Go behind him. Xiaolu's figure flashed, and his speed increased even more. He rubbed the turtle's shell and drilled through. He stood firmly behind the turtle and waited for his rotation to end. Hurry up, the explosive flame kick will kick him up. After the high-speed rotation was over, the shell shrinking skill of the Jenny Turtle was also over, and Ao Feng seized the opportunity and issued an order. Jenny Turtle, shrink back! Xiao Mao shouted anxiously. Ao Feng's mouth twitched, it's too late. Xiaolu's legs were in flames, and he kicked up on one side, kicked the Jenny Turtle when it didn't react, and then jumped up. Jenny Turtle screamed, showing a look of pain. Okay. Kick him down. Ao Feng commanded in a hurry. Jenny Turtle. Use a water pistol. Xiao Mao gave an order that surprised Ao Feng. Can the jellyfish still move now? Jenny Turtle reluctantly raised his head, opened his mouth and spewed a jet of water, which was obviously much larger than before. It collided with the explosive flame kick of the road, and the air suddenly dispersed mist, and both were hit and flew out. Xiaolu pressed one hand on the ground and slid back more than 2 meters before stopping. Although he stabilized his body, he seemed to be out of breath. After all, he was just hatched, and his various abilities were not very strong. The Jenny Turtle, however, smashed into the ground of the training ground firmly, and then stood up staggeringly, but it looked very energetic. Xiaolu, come again, rush up to kill him. Ao Feng immediately ordered when Jenny Turtle didn't have much energy left. Xiao Mao looked at Xiaolu, who was rushing over again, and seemed to be stupid and didn't give any orders. Just when Ao Feng thought he hadn't reacted, he found a flash of light in Xiao Mao's eyes, which made his heart tense, but he didn't expect that Xiao Mao would meet. How to deal with it? Come on, Jenny Turtle. Missing headbutt. Xiao Mao shouted. Do you still use this trick? Be careful, Xiaolu. Ao Feng shouted quickly, but it was too late. Xiaolu's speed was too fast, it was not easy to stop, and missing headbutt was also a charge skill, so the two came into contact in the next instant. Seeing Xiaolu's painful expression, Ao Feng could not help clenching his fists. When he was nervous, he saw Xiaolu open his eyes and gave him a look. At this time, Ao Feng noticed that the Jenny Turtle flew out with Xiaolu, and the mask of mind that wrapped his body disappeared. Okay, Xiaolu gives him the final blow. Push him away and cut him with a cross. Xiaolu pushed the turtle's shoulders with both hands, widening the distance between the two, then crossed his arms to emit a white light, and then split out, hitting the head of the turtle. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com smashed him back, and Xiaolu himself flew out. Ao Feng hurriedly ran 2 steps and caught the falling path. Looking at the other side, the Jenny Turtle has fallen to the ground, and its eyes have turned into a vortex shape. Jenny Turtle lost his fighting power, so Ao Feng won this match. Yet, Xiaolu is amazing. Ao Feng and Xiaolu met each other's palms, hugging him excitedly and turning around in a circle. When Ao Feng carried Xiao Lu back again, the relaxed Xiao Lu had already fallen asleep in a daze. It seemed that the first battle was also a huge drain on him. There is a tacit understanding between you, next time I will definitely not lose to you. Xiao Mao picked up the Jenny Turtle and raised his fist in front of Ao Feng. Ao Feng rubbed Xiao Lu's head lightly, raised his fist, and touched him. I look forward to the next fight with you. Yu Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and most popular serial works are all in Yu Reading. And amp, lt/a and amp, gt, and lt, a and gt, Yu Reading. And lt/a and gt. Wow! What a wonderful battle, great! At this moment, a voice that was very unfamiliar to Ao Feng came over. Xiao Mao put down his hand, turned his head and said proudly, Xiao Ji, you are awake, I thought you had given up receiving the elf. Humph, how could I give up? You don't have to be so arrogant, I will definitely defeat you. Ash shouted in disapproval. Only then did Ao Feng see this person. He was about the same height as himself, his skin was a little darker than his own, and he looked pretty good. Even in his pajamas and slippers, Ao Feng couldn't compliment him. Let's talk about this when you get the elf. I'll tell you some bad news. Xiao Mao spread his hands and looked like he didn't care. The 3 elf prepared by Dr. Amu have already been led. Zai's eyes widened, showing a remorseful expression. Ah! No way! Didn't I wake up a little late today because I was too excited yesterday and didn't sleep well? Why are there none of them? No, I'm still go and see for yourself. Looking at Xiao Ji's figure running out, Ao Feng twitched the corners of his mouth speechlessly. Xiao Mao noticed Ao Feng's expression, smiled and said, "His name is Xiao Ji, and he is so reckless. Generally speaking, his personality is not bad." "Oh? It seems that you never praise people. According to you, he is a good person." Ao Feng raised his eyebrows. Xiao Mao turned his eyes to the horizon. "I didn't praise him, I just told the truth." After speaking, Xiao Mao took out 4 fruits from his pocket and gave 2 to Ao Feng. "This is..." Ao Feng took the 2 fruits and asked. "The fruit that is a special product of the Viking forest can heal injuries and restore physical strength. Hurry up and eat it for your Lioru," Xiao Mao said while feeding the fruit to the Jenny turtle. After awakening Xiaolu, Ao Feng also fed him the fruit. Xiaolu was really in a lot of energy, and within a few minutes, his injuries were almost healed. The power of nature is really amazing. Of course, both humans and elves are born out of nature. Xiao Mao took the recovered jerky to the poke ball. "Ao Feng, Chen Xin, I'll go first." As soon as Xiao Mao walked out the door, a car stopped in front of him, and there were 4 or 5 beautiful girls sitting behind him, shouting that Xiao Mao was awesome. After Xiao Mao got into the car drove away quickly, and the other 2 rookie trainers said goodbye and left one after another, seeing that there was nothing to do. Ao Feng suddenly noticed that Chen Xin was a little unnatural, and asked suspiciously, "What's wrong?" Chen Xin touched her nose, and then showed a fatal smile. "Am I not more handsome than that guy Xiao Mao? Why don't those beauties follow me?" Ao Feng's expression froze. "Cough, you should die. Why do I feel that it was an extremely wrong decision to go out with you? I want to go out with you. What if the beauties look at you and don't look at me?" "That's not necessarily the case. The 2 of us are not the same type at all. The so-called radish and cabbage each have their own love. You chase after you, and I chase after me." Chen Xin completely turned into a and shouted, "Beauties, here we come." Ao Feng looked at Chen Xin amusingly, and he was indeed worried, but he really hoped that Chen Xin would be like this. But he, who was very familiar with Chen Xin, could feel the loneliness that Chen Xin was hiding under her exaggerated appearance. "Hey? Ao Feng Chen Xin, are you here?" Dr. Damo walked out of the research institute, followed by Zai Zai, whose clothes were charred black, and PK Chua beside him. "Dr. Damu." The 2 nodded. "I just had an elf battle with Xiao Mao, and I gained a lot. It's good to have a harvest. The elf trainer is to keep subduing the elf, and then train and improve himself in the battle." Dr. Damu said with some admiration. "Zai Zai, you also know each other, it is the same as you. The time travel trainer." Ao Feng's eyes turned to Xiao Ji, and each stretched out a hand. "Ao Feng, Chen Xin, we have met just now, it's a pleasure to meet you." Xiao Ji hurriedly shook hands with the 2 of them, then touched the back of his head with one hand and said, "Sorry, I was busy asking about the initial Pokémon just now. Your strength is very strong, I just watched your battle and felt blood boil." "Hehe, they're all just rookie trainers, they're all about the same strength." Ao Feng said modestly, "This Pikachu has become your elf?" "Didn't Dr. Damu say?" "Yeah, he's just a little special, isn't he, Pikachu?" Saying that, Ash crouched down and touched Pikachu, but was electrocuted by Pikachu. Ao Feng's heart tightened. It was the first time he had seen such a elf who didn't listen to the trainer and attacked casually. Fortunately his Yuan Lusha and Xiaolu were not like this. "Zai Zai, it seems that you have a relationship with him. There is still room for improvement." Xiao Ji suddenly stood up again and said ambitiously, Yes, but I will try my best." "Xiao Ji." "I saw a woman running over with a group of relatives and friends," saying this to Xiao Ji. Ao Feng and Chen Xin looked at each other and wiped the cold sweat on their foreheads. It seemed that they didn't know when they were going to talk about it. They shouted to Xiao Ji, "Auntie, let's go first. Better to run first." There are two directions to leave from Zhengzhen town, one is to take the highway to Vivani city, the other is to take the forest, and finally you can reach Vivana forest. Of course, in order to see more elves, they still chose to walk through the forest, and then go to Vibrown city to rest. The two of them were not in a hurry. With Chenexin's physique, it was impossible to walk too fast. When the two entered the forest, it was already 3 poles in the sun. Sitting under a tree, Ao Feng and the elves were enjoying the lunch made by Chen Xin. As expected of Chen Xin's nephew, his craftsmanship is getting better and better. While eating, Ao Feng still praised Chen Xin. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, a rice ball flew towards his face, and he grabbed it and stuffed it into his mouth. My nephew's speed and strength are not good enough, so I got it so easily. You're the nephew, I'm going to strangle you. Chen Xin pounced on him, pressing Ao Feng under her body and pinching his neck with both hands. Ao Feng was stunned when he saw the sky, and hurriedly drew out his own elf picture book. Quick, Chen Xin, look up. Seeing Ao Feng's appearance, Chen Xin also felt that something had appeared. She stood up and looked at it, and her mouth widened in shock. Feng, King Feng? It's true. Ao Feng hurriedly used the camera function on his elf picture book to take a picture of King Ho. I don't know how long it has been since no one saw Feng Wang appearing. Now Ao Feng is very excited. You must know that Feng Wang is the divine beast enshrined by their Wei family. The big bird flying towards the rainbow in the sky did not have the human on the ground, but stopped at the slightest, and gradually disappeared into the sky. Great, I have seen King Feng, haha. Ao Feng jumped excitedly holding Chen Xin. According to the family legend, those who can see King Feng's real body will be blessed by King Feng, although not I know if it's true, but it's always good to see a superhero beast. Maybe you will be the one chosen by King Feng to protect the world. Chen Xin looked at the excited Ao Feng and suddenly said a word. However, Ao Feng shook his head. How is it possible? He is a super beast, and I am just an ordinary human being. Even if I have some relationship with him, it will not be very close. I still have this self-knowledge. Besides, what's the use of me going to something that his strength can't solve, and he also has his own messenger. Emperor Yan, Duke Lei and Sujun are all very powerful. Speaking of which, I really want Emperor Yan to be my little boy. Elf. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Chen Xin wondered, is it just a coincidence that I saw Feng Wang today? Maybe so, but today is our lucky day anyway. Let's continue to eat, and leave after a short rest. Ao Feng sat on the ground and started eating. Yu Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and most popular serial works are all in Yu Reading. And amp, 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 lt/a and amp, 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 gt, and amp, 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 lt, a and amp, 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 gt, Yu read books. And amp, 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 lt/a and amp, 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 gt.